I think understanding that time is your single greatest limited resource, not money, not people, it's time. Understanding that, I think, is incredibly important. Once you grasp that, you become protective of your diary and you achieve more of the things that you think are important and achieve your goals in the meantime. So I think in a crisis, and unfortunately, I've had to deal with quite a lot of them, particularly in areas like defence, but also in domestic areas like transport, for example. But I always think in a crisis, the most important thing is to obviously keep calm. Easier said than done, but actually the way to do that is to come back to all the basic common sense things. So it's always the questions you need to be asking as the leader in that crisis, or what, when, who, why, where, and it is remarkably straightforward. But the first thing that happens in a crisis is someone loses their head and they forget to ask the most obvious questions, which are those what, when, why, who, where questions. And once you do that, if you're calm, you can also lead a team that feels calmer as well. And so I think that the leadership position that you occupy is critical in taking your team with you in a crisis as well. So I always think with communication, the test is literally go and find a 12-year-old and explain the problem to them. Um, and if you can't find a 12-year-old, someone who doesn't know the first thing about the subject that the crisis relates to. And then if they're sort of saying, well, I don't understand, or, oh, right, I see, then you've probably got the language about right. And I think with communication, it isn't about trying to speak above people's heads, up here. It's about trying to find words that really resonate and explain it to people. So simple, clear, concise, as I say, language that a 12-year-old would understand. If you can't find a 12-year-old, somebody would understand, even if they have no knowledge of the subject at all that the crisis is about. So I think that's the most important thing, clear and concise. Well, the first thing I'd say is I don't think that business in general really understands politics very well or public life or how to engage with governments. So I've met a lot of C-suites, CEOs, boards of companies who are phenomenally successful businesses, but actually have very, very limited understanding of how the public sector, government operates, how decisions are made, how the supply chain is affected. So I think one useful thing is for C-suites to listen to people who've been in public life to get that understanding. Having said that, actually, there's a massive amount that politicians ought to learn from businesses, and I would constantly be frustrated in for example, just the amount of time stuff takes to happen in government. And you just look at the private sector and business and think, God, they just would have been sorted by now. So I'm not sure this is a one-way street. But I do think that, that when it comes to businesses learning from politics, uh, for virtually every business in the country would be better off if they understood a little bit more about the way the country's run, how governments come to decisions, and therefore, if you're interested in being on the supply side of the public sector of government, understanding how it works is really helpful. The secret to effective time management is understanding that your time is your single greatest resource. It's the most limited thing. It's going to run out and in not that many years' time compared with the amount of time the world has been around. And so most people just don't use time as if it's that incredibly scarce resource. And that applies, I think, in business. It certainly applies in government. And when I first became a government minister, I was housing minister. And for about 3 months, I was kind of run ragged. I mean, I was literally dawn to dusk. My diary was filled up by my brilliant diary manager. And after about 3 months, I called my diary manager in. Her name was Ush. And I said to Ush, it's been really fascinating, but I got to tell you, I'm not finding it very productive because I don't think it really respects the fact that time is limited. We can do a certain number of things. So from now on, I want to approve everything that goes in my diary. I'm going to sign it all off. And Ush was a bit shocked by this. So really, everything. And I said, okay, all right, we'll have three exceptions. Anything that comes in from the Prime Minister can go in my diary. Anything from Her Majesty the Queen, as it was at the time, and anything from Mrs. Shapps, and not necessarily in that order. Those things can go in my diary. But everything else needs to come by me. And I was ruthless about what would fill my diary. As a result, the things in my diary were the things that I really wanted to get done and achieve. And I found myself being far more productive as a result of this. About 3 months later, the FT had run an article saying I was a Duracell minister. Um, the truth was I actually was probably doing less, but it was just more impactful. And I think understanding that time is your single greatest limited resource, not money, not people, it's time. Understanding that, I think, is incredibly important. Once you grasp that, you become protective of your diary and you achieve more of the things that you think are important and achieve your goals in the meantime.